Hey everyone. Before we start today's episode, I want to let you know that I'm going to be talking about some sensitive topics like infertility, IVF treatments, women's periods, and other reproductive health issues. If these subjects are difficult for you, please take care of yourself and feel free to skip this episode or come back to it when you're ready. Welcome to EverydayFI, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. In today's Money Musings episode, I'm finally going to be talking about my infertility journey. For those of you who've been waiting for this story, I have mentioned it several times in past podcast episodes, but I am finally going to be talking about that today. And the biggest lesson that I've learned so far, how to let go of the end you had in mind. We'll be right back to talk about all of this after we hear from our sponsors. When I think about this journey for myself, there are two quotes that I like to come back to. One is by John Lennon, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." And the second one is Stephen Covey, which is "Begin with the end in mind." And the thing is, Stephen, what happens when the end changes? This is what happens when you're busy making plans, life, right? So with this journey of infertility, the biggest thing that I've had to do is change how I'm using my HSA money. And so when I say begin with the end in mind, like the end in mind for my HSA money was to be a bridge or part of the bridge between retirement and early retirement. And so my plan by 2030, my husband, Chris, and I want to quit corporate, go down to part-time jobs or do, maybe jobs here or there. And during the 5 years where we're going to be doing our Roth conversion ladder, we wanted to have a nice 5-year cushion of cash, either like in a mutual fund or a high yield savings account that will tide us over for those years. And part of that was going to be the HSA money because I'm very much about the collect the receipts, put them in the quote unquote shoebox and pay yourself later. That was my end in mind that I had for the HSA. But then life happened. And now with these infertility treatments that I am undergoing, I have to use my HSA money. And I had to be okay with that. And let me tell you, it was very hard when I had to convert my HSA money from investments to a mutual fund. I was lucky in that I got it in time right after Trump took office and the stock market started plummeting because of his tariffs. I actually was able to convert it at the very beginning of that when it just started going down. And so I was able to sell it at more of a high, not the highest, but at least more of a high. So I had more money. But watching that savings dwindle way quicker than I saved it up. It took me like 8 years to get it to, it was about $28,000 at its peak. Now it's down to 2021, and that's due to spending it and also just losing part of it in the market going down a little bit. But watching that deplete, and I know it's going towards a good cause. You don't have to tell me that, but watching it deplete, knowing that it was going to be something else is hard. And I haven't heard conversations about what to do when the end in mind, quote unquote, changes. That's all well and good saying begin with the end in mind. But if the end is 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, it's probably going to change. There's not very many things that don't change within that amount of time. And so it's one thing that I've grappled with a little bit, and it's getting to be a little bit easier. But I think what's hard about it is that the fertility treatments, which I'll get into a little bit more detail, they don't always work, right? So it sometimes feels like money down the drain. You pay $2,500 for some medication and the medication doesn't work, and then you have to do it again and shell out the money again. And it's hard. It's really hard. I am very grateful that I have this HSA money. And now that my husband and I are married, we could also use his. I think he has maybe 10 grand as well. But yeah, it's really hard. But it's something that It was important to us. And so we pivoted what the end in mind was, and the end is now. The end is not. So let me back up a little bit for anybody who's listening to this and they're like, what the heck's an HSA? Okay, let me go into what that is for the people who don't know. The people who do, you can go and check out for a little bit. But an HSA is a health savings plan that usually it comes with a high deductible insurance plan. And you can either get this insurance plan through the ACA, the healthcare.gov market, or you can get the plan from your employer. The plan itself will tell you if the HSA is available. And a lot of the time, if it doesn't explicitly say that, that usually means it's not eligible. So what are the benefits of an HSA? Basically, it's your money. You get to keep it. It's not like an FSA, which is a flexible spending account where it's your money, but you have to spend it by the end of the year. And an HSA also has a triple tax benefit. So when you contribute money to the HSA, you contribute tax-free. So basically, whatever your gross income is, whatever you take from that gross income and put into an HSA account, you don't have to pay taxes on what you put in. You don't have to pay taxes on the growth. So if you have it invested in that account, which I recommend everybody do if they plan on keeping that money for a while, you don't pay taxes on that growth. And if you spend it on qualified medical expenses, which there is a list of what those are from the IRS, I'll link that in the show notes, then you also don't have to pay taxes on it. And so it's actually a really great account for people who want that extra money to bridge between their fully fired years and their Roth Ladder years and things like that, like what we were going to do. And the way you do that is you throw money into your HSA. There are maximums. For 2025, the maximum HSA contribution limit is $4,300 for individuals and $8,550 for families. And then if you are over the age of 55, you can do $1,000 worth of catch-up contributions. So it's not a whole lot of money that you can put into this account, but it is a great way to save a little bit extra into a very tax-advantaged account over the years. And if you max it out every year, which is not hard to do, it's not very much money to save, then after 10 years, you could have almost $100,000 depending on how the market goes. And just think about every single year, the contribution limits usually go up. So that's what I've done the last 8 years. I didn't max it out all the time because I wasn't always making enough to do that. And I also didn't always know the benefits of HSAs, but I tried to max it out as much as I could. Also, sometimes HSAs, they make you have a certain cash cushion before you can start investing. So sometimes it'll be $1,000, sometimes $2,000. I recommend having your out-of-pocket maximum deductible be in cash. So for instance, there's your deductible and then there's your out-of-pocket maximum. And mine is $5,000. So I always had that in cash just in case if, an accident or injury happened and I didn't have $5,000 of cash to pay up front for the treatments, I would have it in my HSA. The fertility stuff is a little different. My health plan doesn't cover some of it. So for instance, the medications, they only cover half, and the medications are quite expensive. And also, if we decide to do like a donor egg, they also don't cover the expenses for the donor themselves, or if they do, they only cover partial, and they certainly don't cover the donor's incentive. So a lot of times people who donate eggs, they get monetary incentive to do so, and that has to come out of our pocket. Luckily, that does count as an HSA expense, so that's pretty cool. So I'm going to go into the story of how I discovered that I was having fertility issues. So it's a little bit, I think, different from other people's stories. Normally, people are with their partners and they're trying to have a baby. It's been a year, maybe 2 years, and they aren't getting pregnant and they're like, what's going on? And they go see a doctor. Yeah, that didn't happen to us. We were not trying to have a baby. I was on birth control and my birth control gave me migraines. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to test and see if going off of this stops my migraines. This was August 2024. I was 37. I went off the birth control, and about 2 to 3 weeks later, I started having hot flashes, like really bad hot flashes. I was waking up in the middle of the night 3, 4, 5 times. I could not sleep. I was soaked, sweating in bed, even though the air conditioner was on at 65 sometimes. I would have them while just like sitting on the couch, and even my husband would notice. And to me, it felt like a volcano going off at the back of my neck, and it would just spread through my head and my face and my chest and my stomach. And it was horrible. And I was like, what is going on? I've never had this before. Also, my period didn't start. And I never had that problem before going off birth control. I always had regular periods after going off of it. They would come back normally. Mine never came back for 3 months, actually. And so I went to see my doctor. I was like, something is going on here. And she was like, and this was just a regular doctor. It was not a fertility doctor. It wasn't even an OB. It was just regular PCP. And she said, you know what? You might have something called primary ovarian insufficiency, or POI. And I was even surprised that she even knew what it was. But I think I was very lucky. She's very smart, probably looked up my symptoms, my age, and her sources told her, this is probably what it is. And so she did a couple different tests to test my hormones. And she was like, these tests are pointing towards this. So we're going to get you in to see a fertility doctor. The fertility doctor did more tests, and it was confirmed that is what I have. The funny thing is I had a feeling that I was going to have fertility issues. There were other clues in my life where I figured that this was going to happen. So one was when I first became sexually active as a teenager, I was not always the most responsible, and nothing ever happened. And I was not on any sort of birth control at those times. And then at 25, I actually wanted to donate eggs. I knew some people who were going through fertility issues, and they talked about having donors, and I thought that would be a really cool way to give back. Plus, it also gave you, where I was donating $10,000, and at 25, $10,000 was a lot of money. So I was like, yeah, this sounds like a great thing. It's like a win-win for everybody. And when I went through that process and they did some of the tests, they were like, your counts for your egg reserve and your follicles are really low. You should talk to your doctor about it. And they didn't give me any other information. Like, I wasn't their patient. Their patient was the person who was receiving my eggs. I definitely will say that it was a male doctor. He was very dismissive and very forceful in his examination. Not the best experience for me. And I never even really got my results on paper. They just told me my results over the phone. So that was really not ideal. And I went to my gynecologist at the time, and I told her what they told me, but unfortunately I didn't have the test results to show her. And she just told me not to worry about it. She's like, you have ups and downs with your cycle, and this was probably just a time of the month where your follicle count was low. I wouldn't worry about it. These fertility clinics, they really want all of these counts to be really high, et cetera, so I wouldn't worry. And I will say, I forgive her for doing that because I don't think a lot of regular gynecologists or doctors really know about primary ovarian insufficiency. It's a super rare disease. It only affects 1% of women, and it is very much a fertility doctor who would have to identify this. I was just lucky that my PCP could even figure out what it was. And so I forgive her for this, but it's hard because at that time, if she would have said, you know what, let's do some more tests, let's see if we can't figure out what this is. At that time, I wasn't technically in POI, according to my fertility doctor. I was still having regular cycles and everything. But because my egg reserve was really low, extremely low, abnormally low, even at 25, what I could have done is harvested and frozen my eggs, and I wouldn't be having the problems I'm having today. Because now my egg reserve is quote unquote undetectable when they did the tests. And so that basically means that I have hardly any eggs left. And with POI, you can get pregnant, but I think they say it's like a 5 to 10% chance. And it's mainly because you only ovulate once, twice, maybe 3 times a year. So it's not once a month. And given my egg reserve, my doctor predicted I probably ovulate maybe 0 to 1 times a year. I'm trying to forgive that doctor for that, but it is a little bit irritating. Okay, so I found out I have this, and this was basically a call to action for Chris and I. Chris and I had been dating for almost 4 years. We knew we wanted to get married someday. We knew we wanted to have kids someday. But this was thrown in our face of like, hey, guess what? You're going to have to make these decisions now. And so we were like, we know we want this, and we're in our 30s. I'm in my late 30s. He's in his mid 30s. We were like, why not now? Life is telling us this is the time, so let's do it. And so we got married and we started our fertility journey a couple weeks ago. I started the first round of IVF drugs. I'm not doing IVF specifically. I'm doing something called COH. Don't ask me what that acronym means. I can't pronounce any of those words. But basically, I'm taking really powerful drugs to stimulate a follicle, get an egg growing, and get me to ovulate. And they're not harvesting anything. It's nothing like that. They're not creating embryos in a petri dish or anything like that for me. It's just because it's so unlikely that I will even ovulate, they don't want to put me through the invasive and expensive procedure of harvesting when there's only like a 50-50 chance that they would even get anything. So we're doing that. We did it 2 weeks ago. It didn't work. They said it was probably because I ovulated too quickly, which is very common for POI. And so we're trying again, actually starting today. And today is Friday, March 21st. So we are starting again today. And they have a third medication that we're going to be able to take. And they said that will hopefully help me not ovulate so quickly. And so that will potentially help. So what are all the costs to all of this? Some of you might be wondering if you're going through anything like this and you're like, wow, how much does all this cost? There's a lot going on here, and there's 2 paths that we are going to take. So obviously we're going to see if we can get a natural born baby through these medications right now. So that's one path. And then the second path is the donor egg from a live woman who is going to basically also do these drugs. And then her eggs are going to be harvested, and whatever egg she gives us, we will be able to create embryos. And then they will be able to transfer that embryo into my own uterus. And so what goes into all of this is, for the first stage that we're doing, which is trying to have a natural baby between the two of us, is you have a baseline ultrasound. You have tons of blood work, you have the medications, and then you have 3 in-clinic monitoring visits. Then you also have check-in appointments with the fertility doctor. And all of this is super expensive. So I think I mentioned that my out-of-pocket maximum is $5,000. Of course, it resets every year. It's only March 21st, and I'm only $700 away from reaching that. And I just paid for a new round of these medications today, which was $2,500. And so I've definitely already met that. So basically, I've spent $7,500 on this so far. And it's a lot of money. I will say that it is one of those things that I did not know this was going to happen to me. And I am so thankful that I have my HSA money, because this is what it's for. Even though my end in mind, quote unquote, was different, HSA money really is, at the end of the day, for healthcare costs, whether it's the ones that I had in the past that I'm going to pay for later in the future, or if it's for something right now. And it just so happens that it's right now, and that's just what it is. And as the Jurassic Park Jeff Goldblum quote says, life finds a way. So we're trying to be very positive about the second round. And hopefully this will be all the money we have to pay. But if not, then the second route is the donor. And so that is even more expensive. You have things like you've got the baseline ultrasound that you also have to do. They also do something called a mock embryo transfer, which is basically making sure that your uterus is set up to actually take an embryo and that you're healthy in that regard and there's nothing standing in the way. I'm lucky in that the only thing that's failing on my body are my ovaries. My uterus is pretty good. And then you have the cost of paying for the donor's care and medication. So basically everything that I've been going through right now, all of these IVF meds and everything, I'm going to have to pay for all of that for the donor, but she's literally going to be going through IVF. So they're going to be taking the eggs out of her and putting them into storage for us. And so that's even extra on top of that. There's the incentive that I talked about. That's $7,500. There's the cost of the embryo implantation, all of that. So total, and we're very lucky that we're working with Duke Fertility Center. They have financial counselors that go through every single cost line by line. And they do say a lot of this is subject to what your insurance pays for and things like that, but it's around $23,000 to $25,000 for just the donor side of it. So on top of what we're already doing right now, it's going to be, if this round doesn't work for us, we will have to pay another $25,000 to do the donor route. And what's a little scary about that is that also could not work. Now, that has a much higher chance. It's 60 to 70% chance of it working, whereas the COH round that we're doing right now, which is us trying to have a natural born baby, is a 1% chance. So I know you guys are probably thinking like 1% chance, why would you even pay money for that? But it's one of those things that you never know until you try, and a 1% chance is still a chance. So you're saying there's a chance. And the fact that the doctor said, okay, well, the first round, we know exactly why it didn't work, and we have a way to circumvent that in the second round. I was like, okay, let's do the second round. That will be my cutoff, though, because first of all, finding out that it didn't work was pretty heartbreaking, even though I was pretty sure it wouldn't. It doesn't matter what your logical brain thinks. This is an emotional journey, and it was very disappointing. And it was also the longest 2 weeks of my life. You have to wait 2 weeks after the procedure to take a test. And my body actually the day before that was already showing signs that it didn't work. And it was really disappointing. And I didn't really cry or anything, but I definitely had a very low mood. I remember going to the gym, and I usually go to a HIIT class. And I'm usually very talkative with all my friends who are in this class, but that day I was in the back. I was very quiet. I didn't meet anybody's eyes because I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to do my workout and leave. And it was just a very disappointing experience. And I am going to put myself through it again. But I told Chris, I was like, if it does work, it's going to be so worth it. Right. And so we are willing to try once more. And if it doesn't, then we'll do the donor route. And I will say that's not exactly ideal. It would be really cool to have a child that's ours. It's funny because I actually thought I wouldn't care about that when I first started this whole process. I was like, oh, I don't really care if it's my child, mine meaning genetically speaking. But as I started going through the actual process of trying to have a genetic child, like my own child, I realized it was more important to me than I thought. And it's funny, I talked to my therapist about that, and she was like, you really don't know how you're going to feel or react in a situation until that situation happens. It's one of those things where people ask you, oh, what would you do if somebody came up to you and put a gun to your head? And you can postulate on what you might do. You don't really know. You have no idea because you've never been in that situation before, or most of us have probably not been in that situation before, so we can't really know. And it's one of those things where this is proving to be very true in this situation. And so I just realized that it was more important to me than I thought. It's not so important that I'd be willing to go through these COH rounds repeatedly, knowing the chances are so low, knowing that I'm depleting this money that I could be using to actually get a child. And it's a balance of trying to be practical and logical while also recognizing that it is emotional and being okay feeling those emotions, but not necessarily letting them dictate the entire experience, but definitely letting them inform part of this experience. And this is where money is not just numbers, right? If you looked at this from a purely mathematical standpoint, what a mathematician would do, they would adopt. Because guess what? You're 100% guaranteed to get a kid for the money when you adopt. So if you pay money to adopt a child, you will get a child. If you don't get a child, you don't have to pay any money. And people might be asking, why don't you adopt? There's a couple reasons. One of them is that adopting, if you don't do it through the foster care system, is around $42,000. So almost twice as much as what we're doing right now. And for me, I worry about connection with a child who is not mine, meaning that I didn't carry. So I am not a child person. I've never been a baby person. I am not somebody who's like, oh, let me hold your baby. Like, I've never been like that. I have two really good friends who have the sweetest baby I've ever met. She's so cute. Every time she laughs, she makes me laugh. And I'll hold her for 10 minutes and then want to give her back. And I love this baby. It's one of those things that I worry that I might have that kind of feeling towards an adopted child. And I would not want that poor child to have a parent like that. Like, they don't deserve something like that. And so that is an anxiety of mine that I have. And so that's why adoption will be our last resort, because we do want a child. And so that will be our last resort. I will say I've talked to a few people about this, and they're like, it's hard to explain. Again, I've never been through this before, so I don't know how I actually will react. I just know that this is how I think I'm going to react. But most of the people who have adopted, they're like, you really don't feel that way. When they put that baby in your arms and they tell you this is your baby, it's like a switch is flipped. And you're like, this is my child. And it just comes flooding out of you like love, and you want to protect them, and it's your child. And I've heard this from people who I know are not just saying this in flowery language because they don't want to tell me how they really feel. No, they're telling me the truth. And I'm hoping that's how I would be with an adopted child as well. My husband, Chris, also says you can make the choice to love this child. And it might be that in the beginning, you have to consciously make the choice over and over and over again. But after a while, it won't be a choice anymore. It'll just be innate. And I know that you can do that because I've seen you do that. And it's one of those things that I want to have the experience of carrying a child, and doing the donor egg route is the way to do that. But I would not discount adopting if the donor egg doesn't work out and we're still like, we really want a child. That's what we're going to do. So that's basically the story of my fertility journeys thus far. And I thought about waiting to tell this story when I was pregnant or I had already had a child or whatever, but I'd been alluding to it so many times in other episodes that I wanted to at least give you guys the rundown of what's going on now. What I'll probably do is do an update episode later on to let you know how everything is going now that you have a background of what's happening. But I think my biggest learning and recommendation from all of this is not to cling too hard to the plans that you make for your life, and not to cling too hard to the quote unquote end in mind, especially for your money. Because as John Lennon said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. All right, thanks for listening, you guys. I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.